What's happening, y'all? Welcome into a new episode of the Two Stripes podcast. My name is Colton Denning, and I'm your host. And I can hear it in my voice that I'm sounding real smug right now, and it's for good reason because I'm so excited for today's show. I have a very special episode for you today. This one is probably my favorite episode of the show that I've ever recorded, and it's the first time in I don't know, at least 3 years, maybe four. I didn't go back and look that I've had somebody other than myself on the show. So there will be a special guest on today's show, and it's a lot of fun. It's also going to be pretty lengthy. Like I don't know I'm recording the intro for this and then an outro later to go along with the main discussion. But this is going to be a long podcast. This is a long. What's the best way to put it? Today's episode is a story, and it's one that I've wanted the world to hear for, I don't know, at least 20 years. It's been that long, and it's a podcast that I've wanted to do for a while now, and I finally just was like, I got to do it. The last time I went home, I just sat down and mapped it all out and was able to get it done, and I think it's one. No matter what college football team you root for, other than one, you're going to be able to relate to this. And if you root for the team we're talking about, you're really going to be able to relate to this. But it's a story that I think everybody can relate to as a fan, and one that is just was a once in a lifetime moment, and one that we say in the podcast a bunch of times was just a moment in time that's never going to be replicated again for many different factors. And we'll get into that as we get through the show. But I think you're really, really going to enjoy today's podcast. Before we get to that, though, I got to take care of some business. And if it's your first time listening to the show, first of all, thank you for taking the time to listen to the show. I want to welcome you in. I hope you enjoy the show. And be sure to subscribe. I don't really record that often, but I pop in here and there. The last time I recorded was last month about Ohio State, but I'll be here and there throughout the off season. But if you go to Apple and Spotify, you can find the show. Just search Two Stripes Podcast. Follow along. Leave a star rating. Leave a review. It helps other people find the show. It helps other people find my work, which is the most important thing. And you can also listen on SoundCloud. SoundCloud.com/TwoStripesPod. More importantly than even that, today's show is going to have a visual element to it, and you don't need to watch it to be able to get the full scope of it, but this is just to help people fully digest the story that me and my interviewee are going to tell today. So go to youtube.com/Colton Denning. If you're not already aware, I run my own college football YouTube channel. It's the best one on the internet. I say that with no shame at all. But there's going to be a visual component to today's show. So that's going to be up on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Colton Denning, and you can listen and follow along and watch along with the story that we tell to this one. Also, just in addition to that, I have all the other great college football content going up on the YouTube channel throughout the offseason. There's no better place to get through the offseason than youtube.com/Colton Denning. And again, I have zero shame in saying that. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. And then lastly, before we get to the show, subscribe to the website, twostripescpd.com. There's also going to be a post that goes along with this one and some video, some personal memories, photographs, videos from the story that we're telling today. And subscribe to Two Stripes CPD. Again, just like the YouTube channel, I don't think there's a better college football website. So it's stripescpd.com. You can subscribe for $7 a month or $50 a year. There's also going to be a special yearly promo code with this one that I'll get to on the outro of the episode that I'll give to the listeners of this show. And there's going to be a bunch of cool stuff. I'm going to have a big project in March that'll be fun on the website. So again, if you're a fan of college football, whether it's the YouTube channel or twostripescpd.com, I think they're the two best places to just get you through the offseason and to get you ready for what should be a crazy 2024 in college football. Also, before I forget, Two Stripes CPD is also on TikTok and Instagram. That's where I throw up a bunch of just random highlights, old coach commercials, stupid plays, just random stuff that I think people will enjoy. So on both of those platforms, TikTok and Instagram, just search Two Stripes CBD. You can also follow me on Twitter at Dubsco. That's all my socials, and just interact with me and all the content that I put out there. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into today's show. So if you know me, or if you've followed me on Twitter, or subscribed on the YouTube channel or the website, or listened to this podcast, you know that I'm an Ohio State fan. That's my team, that's my squad, that's who I root for. But I'm also a huge Colorado fan. I was born and raised in Boulder, and my parents had season tickets from 1989 to either 2005 or 2006. I spent my whole youth every fall Saturday either going to CU games, or if they were on the road, going to somebody's house and going to a party and watching them play when they were on the road. You know, we had, and probably like many of you guys, we had a tailgate crew that we would tailgate with every single CU home game at the same spot, and this was for almost 20 years, where we tailgated right by Boulder Creek, about a 3-minute walk up to Folsom. If you're a CU fan, if you're from Boulder, or you go to CU right now, you know what I'm talking about, that walk from Boulder Creek up to Folsom Field. And that is how I spent my childhood. And that was really where my love for college football developed, was those fall Saturdays in Boulder watching Big 12 North football. And those were the glory days of Colorado football. I was born in 1990, the year that they won the national championship. And, you know, by the time I was I was going to every single game with my parents. They were just bringing me along. And so, like I said, I got to experience the glory era of Colorado football up close. And today's episode is about probably the greatest moment in Colorado football history, which is CU's 62-36 win over Nebraska in 2001. And this is a conversation with my dad about that day and about the story of how that day turned into probably, I don't know, if it's not the greatest day of our lives for me and my dad, it's pretty close as a shared experience to the top. And it's a story about a moment in time that will never happen again in sports and in society. Because if you remember, it was 2001, and it was 2 months after 9/11. And this story, and the real crux of this story, is about how my dad was able to bring an FDNY ladder to our tailgate party for this game, and the story of how that came about, how that day happened, how my dad kind of, basically just snuck these guys away from the university and what they were supposed to do with the university that day. This is a story that could never, ever, ever happen in 2024. It couldn't happen. It could only happen in this moment in time, and it's one of the wildest things ever. And if it's not the greatest moment of our lives as a shared experience between me and my dad, I don't know what else would be, because the Cowboys haven't won shit in the playoffs, so we don't get that moment. But this is probably the greatest shared experience of my life with my dad, and this is the story of that and how it came together. And I think it's one of the wildest stories that you will ever hear. And I think unless you're a Nebraska fan, you're gonna love this one, and you'll be able to relate to the day that we had, because we all have these days as a sports fan, and just in life in general, where it's an experience that you're gonna have more experiences that are awesome and great and you'll remember for the rest of your life, but there are certain experiences and memories that in the moment, like, this is a 1 in a million day in my life and I'm never gonna live it again. And this is one of them. And again, it's about Colorado-Nebraska in 62-36 and what that game meant to us. But it's also a look into America in that time period, and, right after, immediately, post 9/11, and what that was like, and the story of these firefighters bringing them to our tailgate party, and the story of that day and I think you're really going to like it. And I think my dad does a great job. And there's a lot of nuggets and tidbits and just random factoids in here that I think make this an incredible college football story. And I think you're going to love it. So without further ado, here's the true story of the day Colorado beat Nebraska 62-36. How my dad brought an FDNY ladder to our tailgate party. How the hell he ended up on the field with them for the game. And it all adding up to one of the greatest days of our lives. Have you ever been on a podcast?
I've never been on.
Is this your
first one?
Your first deal? All right, well, let's get right to it. We're into the interview. I'm here with my first guest in a really long time. I can't remember the last time I had a guest on the podcast, and it is a very special guest because it is, I was going to say the person who gave birth to me, but you are not, Mom.
I'm not.
You're my dad. This is my dad, Thomas Denning. He's joining the podcast, Dad.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Colton. It's great to be on. I'm looking forward to it. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time, too. And it's a story that's, what year is it, 2024? Almost 23 years old. I've wanted to tell it, I'd say, for that long, but one, it's not my story to tell, and two, I've probably been thinking about it now for a couple of years, and we're going to talk about the CU-Nebraska game, 2001, which, even if you're not a Colorado fan, if you're just a college football fan, you know this game and its significance not only for Colorado, but really for Nebraska and what it meant for them, ever since, and I'm sure we'll get your thoughts on Nebraska and their program as we go through this. But the story of an FDNY ladder coming to not only the CU game, but our tailgate that we had as season ticket holders, and just the craziness of that story. And so it's a story that I've wanted you to tell for a long time, and we're gonna get into it today.
Yeah, I'll try to remember as much of it as I can. It still brings back just tremendous memories of. There's so much that's changed, obviously, since then in the college football landscape, and particularly with Colorado. But boy, the memories of the game age well. They really do.
Before we get into that, I want to lay a little bit of groundwork, and this is going to be lengthy, so everybody bear with me, because I really think it's necessary to fully understand just everything that happened in that game, because we lived it, and it was special for so many reasons. But the lead up to it and everything that kind of went into that game and the history in the past decade and where Colorado was kind of just takes it to a whole other level. So the year before, in 2000, CU went 3-8, and that was Gary Barnett's second year, and in his first year coming from Northwestern, right?
That's right.
He was 7-5 in his first year in 1999, and that was coming off of Rick Neuheisel just abruptly leaving to go to Washington. Abruptly. and two, that's a window where that happens nowadays, and I feel like people talk about when coaches leave like that as though it's a new thing, but Rick Neuheisel leaving CU, and there were chances where he could have won a national title at CU, and just abruptly, as we said, left and went to Washington.
He punched out. He went to Washington, and we went to Washington. I went up there with some friends of mine the next year, the first year that he was up in Washington, and we were intensely hoping for a CU win, which we did not get. But that's another podcast, maybe.
Yeah, and so CU in 2000, in Barnett's second year, went 3-8, but that record was a little bit misleading. They had 6 one-score losses to some really strong teams. The opening game, they played CSU and they lost by 4, and that was a Colorado State team that finished 10-2 and 14th in the AP poll. I don't remember them being that good, but that was right in the middle of, maybe not the middle of Sonny Lubick being there, but closer to the end, but where they were really strong there.
Bradley Van Pelt was
that might have been,
or after?
Yeah, that might have been one of the first years of Bradley Van Pelt. After that, they lost 17-14 to USC. I think USC was ranked. Whoever it was before Pete Carroll, that was right before Pete Carroll took over. The week after that, they lost to Washington 17-14, and that Washington team went 11-1 and won the Rose Bowl. So definitely not a a bad loss by any means, whereas losing 23-15 to Kansas at the time, I know Kansas is everybody's, second favorite team now with what they're doing, but Kansas was not great in the Big 12 at that point. And then 35-27 loss to Iowa State, who finished 9-3. And then lastly, a 34-32 loss at Nebraska, who finished 10-2 and ninth to close out the season. And what's probably for you one of the most painful losses. I mean, we've experienced the Cowboys, but just for CU, I'd say one of the most painful losses ever for CU fans. And you and Mom and the tailgate crew were out at that game.
We went to that game, and you wonder. And there are other fans out there that would go and travel with your team when you're 3-7 at that point. And I think Nebraska was pretty good that year.
Yeah, they were 9-2.
Yeah, they may have even played in the Big 12 championship game. And as I remember, the first play of the game, Colorado threw an interception that was returned for a touchdown. And we had taken the train out to Nebraska to that game and had a great time. It's about a 6.5-hour trip out to Lincoln, and drops you off a couple of blocks from a number of hotels, and you can walk to the stadium. But beautiful day, if you can call anything in Nebraska beautiful. And immediately CU's down 7-0. They get the ball and give up another touchdown. It's 14-0, and I'm wondering, why are we here? But it was an amazing game. Colorado had a great comeback, which included going for 2 points after they closed a pretty big deficit, and then they added to the misery of CU fans everywhere with the way they closed that game out.
Yeah, so for the exact particulars, they were down 31-24 with 47 seconds left. They score a touchdown, and as you said, they're 3-7. They're playing with a freshman quarterback in Craig Oaks, and Barnett decides, fuck it, I'm going to go for 2. He goes for 2. And they get it, and they have the lead, 32-31. But for some reason, whether it was Barnett's decision or whoever the special teams coordinator was at that point, they decide to squib kick. And when I say it, I mean, if you've never seen it, if you're not a Colorado fan, if you're a Nebraska or not a Nebraska fan, go YouTube it when I say that they squib kick. And it's the worst squib kick of all time. Search Colorado-Nebraska 2000. I think there's just like a 5-minute video of the ending. It's terrible. Nebraska starts with the ball on their own 40 with 47 seconds left. They throw a couple incompletions, but it takes 5 plays. They get inside the 15. They kick a short field goal for the win. There's like 2 seconds left, so you can't do anything. And it's just a heinous
devastating loss. And, the squib kick might as well have been an onside kick. It was so terrible. But then on, I think, a 3rd and 7 or 3rd and whatever, Colorado got called for roughing the passer. So they gave up 15 yards. And so for context, which I'm sure you'll get into, Colorado had always set Nebraska as the bar to be good. And Barnett had some history with the program. So again, he comes in, as you mentioned, we got a freshman quarterback. We go on the road, and they almost, which we're so used to because it had been, I think, 10 years before since CU had beaten them, come out with a win, but we don't. And I got to walk out of the stadium and listen to all this bullshit of good game, you play us tough. All the falsity that you hear that you just don't want to hear from other fans. You'd rather them just, yell obscenities at you and not spit on you, but just go on your own way. So that kind of set, the tone again for another loss. It's another year. We're bad again.
And we won't, we'll get into it later, but they weren't getting their ass kicked. I mean, there was a stretch of, because they lost to Nebraska 9 straight years, and there was the tie in 90, it was 90 or 91, right?
Yeah, 90.
Whatever there was to start the winless streak, there was a tie, and then, they lost 9 straight. And not a lot of those games, maybe 1 or 2 of them, they really got wrecked. And that was when Nebraska was
really super good, and there was one game where I think Nebraska won like 44-24 with Tommy Frazier as the quarterback. And I could be wrong about this because my memory with Nebraska is always jaded towards CU. But Nebraska probably got a couple of late touchdowns to pad it, like they did with a lot of their wins. But Colorado always got up to play Nebraska. And the fans, it was our game of the year, regardless of what our record was. And and other rivalries have that, and this was one that CU had for many, many years.
Yeah, we'll get into the history of leading up into 2001 a little bit more as we go on, but definitely painful and even worse for you guys given that you were there. But to close out the 2000 season, it was 3-8, but they were. You hate to say you're better than your record because your record is what you are, but they played a lot of strong teams. They played a team like Nebraska tough. The other two losses were 44-21 to 11-3 Kansas State, and then a 28-14 loss to 9-3 Texas. So, long story short, they really weren't an awful team outside of the record. They weren't like how CU was right before Dion got in, where they just had no hope. They would beat Northern Colorado, and they squeaked out a win over, one Pac-12 game. But they were in every single game, and you felt like there was something there.
Well, you knew there was something there because it was post-McCartney, and even though Neuheisel kind of trashed the program for the time that he was there, they had one or two seasons. One season, I think they were like 11-2 with him. So the talent was still coming in. They were playing in the Big 12, so they were still recruiting Texas really strong. They were still recruiting California good, and they were even getting into Louisiana. They would get some. Cordell Stewart, I think, came from Louisiana, so they got some good players. But so we knew the talent was there, and Barnett was a Colorado guy, and we felt like he could turn it around.
Yeah, he knew exactly kind of what the program needed and what it was going to take, and that's where a lot of the optimism came from, is just how many upperclassmen contributors they had coming back to the program. There was the incredible duo of Victor Rogers and Andre Gerard at offensive line, two of the best in CU history, and Gerard, one of the best interior offensive linemen in the NFL in the 2000s, made the Pro Bowl five times with the Cowboys. We got to watch him up close as fans of the Cowboys as well as CU, and the Cowboys, waste his career like they've done to plenty of other guys over the last 20 years. But they were a spectacular duo. You had probably the best player on the team, definitely the best player on the team, and one of the best players in the country in tight end Daniel Graham. He could have gone to the NFL after his junior year, and he decided that he wanted to come back. And I don't remember if he specifically said beat Nebraska, but he wanted to come back to accomplish something and go out on top.
He did, and Graham, I think, was a Colorado. I think he went to Thomas Jefferson High School as well, so he had some local ties. But to your point, there was some talent, and the talent was in the offensive line, as you mentioned. Gerard making the Pro Bowls. Victor Rogers was drafted by the Lions, and there were some other players on that line that they were big. They could run block, they could pass block, and they had some running backs, which I'm sure we'll get into. And Graham was an NFL caliber player, and so you knew that the talent was there. And as you mentioned, the close losses. And by the way, as long as we're talking about Nebraska, this whole thing about one score losses just has pissed me off. I always refer to them as losses, and I don't know if fans out there, do you actually feel better when your team loses by one score? Sometimes I think you actually feel worse. You'd rather they just get the crap beat out of them. But yeah, that was it's a stat that fans throw out as if it takes away from the actual loss, which it doesn't.
We'll discuss that on the Scott Frost episode of the show if we ever do one. But Graham got drafted in the first round by the Patriots in 2002 after he won the Mackey Award for best tight end in the country in 2001. Won 2 Super Bowls, had a 10-year NFL career. Just running through the rest of the guys there just to give some people some context. Senior running back Cortland Johnson, he was the leading rusher in 2000. He came back. He could do a lot of things. There was Justin Bannon on the defensive line. He was a first-team All-Big 12 guy in that 2001 season, 5th-round pick. Played 11 years in the league. We don't need to discuss where he's at right now. There's safety Michael Lewis, who was one of the most underrated players probably in Colorado history. And, he's a guy that if you really watched football or the NFL in the 2000s, mid-2000s, late 2000s, you probably would remember him. But, he was a second-round pick for the Eagles. He played 10 years in the league, made a Pro Bowl. He was a hell of a player. And then you had a whole lot of other nice pieces that you'd only remember if you were a CU fan. But the point is that they not only had a lot of experience back, but these were guys who, as you mentioned, were Big 12 caliber players. They weren't just guys cycling through the program. These were legitimate guys who had NFL talent. And if they weren't, they were guys who were making second team all Big 12, third team all Big 12.
And even though CU later went to the Pac-12, when they were playing Oklahoma and Nebraska every year, when Oklahoma and Nebraska were good, and then when Texas and the Texas schools joined the Big 12, they were physical running teams that could still throw the ball, but as you mentioned, Colton, they could line up and hit with anybody. And they had guys that, like you mentioned, that were first team or second team that could go out and knock heads with anybody.
And then in addition to all the experience they had, there were the young players like Donald Strickland, corner, he played in the league, receiver Derek McCoy, tight end Quinn Sipnewski, who we knew pretty well. You had Marcus Harris on the defensive line, and then the two diamonds of the whole roster that everybody was excited about, and quarterback Craig Oaks and running back Marcus Houston. Oaks, for context, was the 7th-ranked quarterback in the 2000 recruiting class. He got thrown into the fire as a freshman down the stretch of that season and showed flashes, especially in that Nebraska game that we talked about. And then there was Houston, who was a top 5 recruit in the 2000 class. And when I say top 5, I don't mean like a top 5 running back. In the whole class, he was a top 5 overall prospect, regardless of position. He was a kid who also was local, went to Thomas Jefferson High in Denver. And, if you're a younger fan, you may think just because CU's been so bad that, some of the guys Deion's brought in, that he's the first guy to ever do this at Colorado. But Marcus Houston was the guy that everybody looked at of like, this could be the best player in the history of the program.
Well, we thought that too, and it was such a big deal when he came to Colorado because, to your point, the in-state talent, Craig Oaks and Houston, the two examples that you mentioned, it wasn't assured that they would go to CU. There wasn't NIL back then. There wasn't hey, we're going to go because it's home state U. And so Marcus Houston was one of the top 5 recruits all over he could have gone anywhere that he wanted to. And when he chose Colorado, we all thought, oh my gosh, we're set up we're going to be big. We're going to be good.
The only guys who were ranked ahead of him in that class were DJ Williams, who went to Miami and ended up having a really successful NFL career. Brock Berlin, who went to Florida, the quarterback, and then transferred to Miami. Charles Rogers, RIP at Michigan State, first-round pick, one of the best college receivers I've ever seen, and then defensive end Travis Johnson, who went to Florida State. Houston was ranked ahead of running backs like Willis McGahee, Greg Jones, Ronnie Brown, and Tatum Bell, all guys who went to the league. In his freshman season, he was second. He was the second leading rusher on the team in 2000, and much like Oaks, when they went into that 2001 season, it was supposed to be their team, and you had them along with this returning depth, and so there was a lot of optimism and a lot of hope heading into that season, which immediately got extinguished when they lost in the Jim Thorpe Association Football Classic, Week 1, I think it was late August, to Fresno State at home in David Carr, and it was 24-22. Oaks throws a pick on 3rd and goal from the 3 with 3 minutes left in the game. They could have just kicked and got a lead, but they end up losing that game. And Fresno was really good. They finished 11-3, and of course David Carr ends up being the first pick in the draft that next year. But that was a tough start to that season.
We didn't even know. It did, and we didn't even know who David Carr was. We heard that he had great numbers in terms of size and arm strength, and Fresno was like Fresno. It was like...
That was one of the wins that put them on the map, because they were really... maybe it's high to say, but, for those couple of years before Boise really got on the map, Fresno was kind of the first team from the West that I remember that got labeled as like, here are the giant killers. They're beating teams from the Pac-12. And then, of course, they go play USC in 2005 and Reggie Bush has his famous game. But that was another one where it was like, wow, this Fresno program they're something.
Yeah. And when they came in and beat CU in the first game, you lose your home opener, and all the excitement just goes in the toilet.
And they managed to rebound the next couple weeks. They smashed Colorado State 41-14 in Denver. They beat San Jose State the week after that 51-15. They go 2-1, and that brings us to our whole tie-in for this episode. 20 minutes in, I've buried the lead. but they're 2-1, and they're supposed to play at Washington State on September 15th. This is a game that I don't think a lot of CU fans remember was supposed to happen, and I think a lot of teams that year only played either 10 or 11 games because, of course, 9/11 happens.
Yeah.
Basically, I think every game that week, not only in college but also the NFL. Maybe the NFL played, but college for sure got canceled.
Yeah, college got
played.
canceled, and I remember that weekend I was actually on a business trip out in North Carolina and had a meeting on Tuesday morning, September 11th, and woke up and saw the horrific crashes into the trade centers and knew that my meetings were going to be canceled. And of course, there was tremendous loss of life and whatnot, and then realized, wow, I got to get home. Like, that's a first world problem. But my first thought was, how am I going to get home, because there was no air travel? And so I ended up going to the airport there in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I rented a car and drove across the country listening to AM radio. And I listened to talk radio and was just listening to these wonderful stories, and there were no planes in the air. So I think as you kind of set up the game, you got to remember the context of what's happening here, that we've had this unprecedented tragedy in our country's history, going all the way back to Pearl Harbor. Games have been canceled, as they should be. And there is just this perplexity of, hey, do we even play football this next weekend? I don't even know who they played that next week at home, but they had a home game because the Washington State game was canceled. And then I believe they played Kansas State or somebody at home. I don't remember.
They played Kansas afterwards.
But
and that's kind of, I think everybody, it's obviously trivial compared to everything else, but that's a kind of a lost game for CU because Washington State went 10-2 that season.
Wow.
They were really good. But I have noticed as I've gotten older, and now it's been 23 years basically since, that there is kind of a demarcation between people, if you were around and remember 9/11, and now we're getting to the point where people, not just people, but for our purposes of the conversation, athletes, people within the public eye who are almost adults now, basically, who didn't live it. And it's just very weird if you weren't around for, I was a kid, but I do remember life before 9/11, and it's very different from there's just a tinge that kind of comes with everything that happened if you remember it and you grew up in it, compared to if you grew up in a post 9/11 world and don't have a memory of it.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because you'd think, well, I worked for a company that was based out of New York City, and we all try to associate or make, we have ties, and we're going to see some with this game that are bigger than the game. But the travel back, driving across the country was interesting, and then trying to say, well, okay, how are the athletes going to travel, and how are they going to play, and how does the country then go back to say, oh, well, we're going to celebrate football? Like, what's going to happen when they play the first game in New York? Or what's the World Series going to look like? Yeah. Which that was memorable as well.
So, for our purposes of the conversation and why we're here, how did everything start to come together? Because I haven't said anything. I'm sure I'll say something in the intro and post production.
Sure.
But how did this whole story come together, where we had an FDNY ladder group come to our tailgate for the 2001 Nebraska game? What initial conversation? What do you remember about how all that happened?
Yeah, so I think you set a good context, and everybody has their own take on 9/11. And so you mentioned the Nebraska game. This is our biggest game of the season, and the teams had been building all season. Nebraska was rated number 1, and Colorado was in the top 10. But the way that it came about was I still had a subscription, believe it or not, to the newspaper. And so you talk about post 9/11 and pre 9/11. I used to read the newspaper every day and read the sports section.
Well, and that's when there was two newspapers.
Yeah.
There was the Denver Post and the Rocky
Mountain News. And we had the Boulder Camera,
Daily
which
Camera,
I hate to put a plug in for them, but that's how this came about. So we'll give them their due. So here's how it came about. And again, you got to get back to context here. I'm not using email. I'm not checking my Twitter feed every day. I'm not getting DMs on Instagram. I'm reading the newspaper. And I'm reading, for some strange reason, in the sports section, I see a small ad in the sports section which says former CU grad and NYPD or NYFD firefighter wants tickets to the CU-Nebraska football game. So I'm like, wow, that's odd. Wants tickets, firefighters. So remember that we had experienced and lived images of the towers coming down, of the firefighters rushing into the buildings, of the rubble that was in New York. And I worked for a company that was based out of New York. So I went back to New York on a business trip in October, and it was horrific. And this is, a month afterward. So there was a part of me when I saw that said, there's no way I'm going to get tickets. It's CU Nebraska. The tickets are through the roof. But I'm going to figure out a way to get in touch with this guy and say, just come to our tailgate party. Because everybody thinks they have the best tailgate party, right? You've probably done quite a few stories on tailgate parties. And so I see the ad and I see the phone number, and it's a New York City phone number. And I've got one of those old Nokia 9-pound phones. Yeah. And so I call it, and it goes to voicemail, but it doesn't leave a message because the mailbox is full. And this happens for a week. But because of who I am, and this is the kind of work that I do, I just keep calling it because I'm just stupid. So I keep calling, and I finally leave a message. And the guy's name, Paul Keogh, he's CU grad, I later learned. He has this long message. So I leave him a message and I say, hey, I don't have any tickets for you, but I'm going to tell you what, I have the best kick-ass tailgate party, and you're coming to it, and you're bringing the firefighters. Here's my phone number. Give me a call.
And this is a lot, because I was 11 at the time, where I'm just tertiary. I'm hearing a lot of this for the first time and really being able to understand it.
Yeah. Now. This is in October. The game is in November.
Yeah.
Another week goes by and I don't hear anything. That's anything. Crazy. And so I left another message, and it was the mailbox is full. So I left another message. I think I ended up finally when I got through to leave a message, was probably about my 5th or 6th time, just to give context to how this shit goes down. So I left, and so I'm coming home from work, and I get a phone call, and it's a 212 area code, and my heart just starts to race. And I'm like, this is it. This is it. I'm like, hey, this is Thomas. And he goes, Thomas, it's Paul Keogh. And I said, Paul, I have been waiting for your call. How the heck are you, man? And he said, I'm doing good. I'm really super excited for the game. I appreciate your enthusiasm. We would love to come to your tailgate party. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it still gives me goosebumps 23 years later. I'm like, well, I'll tell you what, you've got my phone number. I've got your phone number. What are the details? When are you coming out? What's your itinerary? And we'll take care of everything. Once you give me an idea of where you're going to be, I'll tell you where we're going to meet, and you can, give me an idea of what you want to do. So he says, that sounds great. I'll send you, I'll call you and tell you the itinerary that we have. We're scheduled to go up to the Dow Ward Center. Do you know where that is? And I said, actually, I do. It's right where we go in for our tickets. I said, I can meet you there. Why don't we do that? So we got to that point where we had established a meeting.
So at that point, too, they were already talking with the university.
Yeah, they were 100% talking to the university. The university knew they were coming out. Paul was a graduate of CU, and they They had some things scheduled, which we'll get
discuss.
into.
When did you, or did you beforehand, was there any coordination between you and the rest of Boulder Creek Tailgate Club with the university at that point, or
None.
just not until the day?
None. So you know how every like tailgate party probably has its own freaky traditions. So we had this tailgater of the year. And it was, a little replica of the stadium. And at the end of the season, the last game, it was usually Nebraska was the last game. And if they weren't playing Nebraska, it was like Iowa State. Then we would have our last tailgate party. And before we would go up to the stadium, we would all vote and give the tailgater of the year. I'm like, I'm fucking winning this year. I'm going to win it. So I didn't want to tell anyone because I also thought, this is too good it's just gonna unravel. It's just there's no way that I can possibly pull this off because there's too many moving pieces.
And you and Mom had been season ticket holders since '89.
Since '89,
so 11 years at that point.
And it had only missed 2 games. And I know that there are people that have gone to hundreds of games in a row, but I have a life, and we went to as many home games as we could. The only time we would miss a game is if we were out of town, and we were out of town twice.
With 2 kids too.
Yeah.
So those are some of my most vivid memories growing up, is being right by the creek and walking with Mom to, I think it was one of the hotels, and getting hot chocolate, and they'd have game day up on the big screen.
Yeah.
This is such a niche portion of the audience who may get this, but back when they had the bubble courts, the tennis courts by the Boulder Creek.
Yeah, they did.
And you could just walk up to Folsom, and now there's, they have different walkways, but it was when they used to have the big hill where you would, and if it were snowy and icy, you might die walking up the hill.
We called it Buzzkill Hill.
Yeah.
And because people would come in from out of town, and it was so steep that it literally would take your breath away. And there really wasn't a good way to go, because if you went up Folsom, you still had to go uphill. Yeah. But if you went down the Boulder Creek path, it was steeper, which, by the way, the practice fields were, the players had to walk down that hill and then go to the practice fields.
Yeah, very different from the facilities around Folsom Field now.
So different.
But as all this is going down, and 9/11 happens, and CU, as we said, they don't play that game against Washington State. They don't make up any of those games. Everybody just kind of has a bye week. The team gets back on the field, and they start to get into a groove. They beat Kansas 27-16 to start conference play in the Big 12. They beat Kansas State on the road 16-6. After that, Kansas State was ranked 20th at that point. And then Texas A&M 31-21 at home for consecutive wins over ranked opponents. So at this point, they're 5-1. They're ranked 14th. And it's like, okay, they're in the Big 12 North at that point. There's Nebraska, and Kansas State was really good too. So for them to have just beaten Kansas State on the road was a statement win. And you get to 14th in the country, and they go on the road and they played 9th ranked Texas, and that was a game that you also went to.
Yeah, went to that one, and going back to the A&M game, that was just electric atmosphere.
Yeah,
we're like, man, we're back. CU football is back. It's exciting. So I decided to go to Texas, and it just all comes undone.
Well, there was also a separate reason for that trip, because Tyler, my older brother, was picking colleges at that
That's
point.
Right. I'm like, hey, you should come to. Your dad was. I was born in Texas. Proud of it, and said, why don't you come to Austin? Let's go to the ball game. And Colorado's good, and you can check out Texas, and that way you won't be roped into just going to see you. So
and he ended up going to Texas.
And he's still there.
And he's still in Austin right now. But they go down to Austin, and they get smoked. They lose 41-7. Craig Oaks doesn't play in that game. It was either the A&M game or the K-State game. He has a concussion. So senior quarterback Bobby Pesavento, who had started, I think, multiple years before that, but he was, he was a guy that you could just put in, and he was a steady quarterback, and he was a senior at that point. So he's basically stepping in for Oaks at that point, and so they're 5-2. It's a setback, but Texas is top 10. They're really good. They're starting to hit a roll under Mac Brown. But the next week is the week where everything really changed for them, because they go on the road They play at Oklahoma State. And this is when Les Miles was at Oklahoma State. Everybody remembers when he was at LSU.
Yeah.
And they don't remember when he was at Oklahoma State. But that ended up being the true launching point of that season because they're trailing 16-7 at half, but they end up fighting back. They score a touchdown with 6 minutes left to take a 20-19 lead. And of course, you're going to go for two to try to get a 3-point lead. But on the touchdown, they take two post whistle penalties. One is for a celebration penalty, and I think another one is it's some sort of unsportsmanlike conduct or roughing. And so they get backed up to the 33-yard line, and you're still not going to kick because it just makes no sense. It doesn't do anything for you. So they go for two. They throw up a prayer, and I think it's Derek McCoy is just wide open in the end zone, and they converted 2-point conversion from the 33-yard line. They go up 22-19, and then they seal a game with an interception on Oklahoma State's last drive. They win, and they get to 6-2, and at that point, it's like, okay, now they really have a chance here.
Yeah, there's no shame in losing to Texas. And just as an aside on that, at that point in the season, Holly, my wife, Holly, your mom, was every time CU would win, she would make cookies, for chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, Eric Bieniemy would come out and grab more than his share all the time, and he'd always come out. He always would give me a couple of cookies, and then he'd come out like a minute later and go, "I'm just gonna have me a few more." I go, "Well, you get whatever you want, Scooter." But so we had, we weren't hangers on because I had been in the media years before and had interviewed people, but we were comfortable enough with the staff that they knew who we were. We weren't big money donors, but we were true supporters of the program. And when we were down in Texas, I had called Coach Barnett's secretary and said, "Hey, what time are they going to do the walkthrough?" And she gave me the time. So I told Tyler, I said, "Well, we'll go meet the team."
And that's when you could do that.
You could
try to do that today, and maybe if you have a kid and your kid is sick or it's like a Make-A-Wish situation, you could do. But back then, even you could just call the secretary and say, "Hey, when are they doing the walkthrough? Can we be a part of that somehow?"
Yeah, and she told us. So we show up and we're sitting in the bowels of Darrell K. Royal, and the buses pull up, and we're in an area that we're not supposed to be in. And I know it, but we're just totally comfortable. So Barnett comes walking in, he's leading the whole team, comes right up to me, goes, "Where we go?" And I go, "Right down here." And did everything but walk down there with them. So to your point, Colton, at this point, after they beat Oklahoma State, I'm over the loss to Texas. I'm like, okay, things are setting up. Nebraska's good. This is going to be a hell of a game.
And they'd already beaten Kansas State, who was the main competition, and Missouri wasn't. Missouri, I think that might have been Brad Smith's second year, but they weren't quite. I think in 2002, Missouri started to get better too. So you had Kansas State and Nebraska were really the top two dogs in the Big 12 North, and Kansas again. Kansas was not anywhere near kind of where they would get with Mark Mangino and where they are now. But I was going to ask too, that's around when Mom started making cookies.
It totally was, and it was like I used to do high school football on the radio and have interviewed people before, so it wasn't like this, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're here." It was like we felt like it was our office, which, by the way, we would go up. Kathy Brandt was so kind to us, and
she was the secretary.
She was the secretary for Coach Barnett, and when they would do their Friday walkthroughs, we could go up and we could watch them from Coach Barnett's office. And just be totally comfortable. And you may remember going in there and sit in his chair or go up on his patio and watch. And so we started to, at least be familiar with some of the players. And they're probably used to just seeing hundreds and hundreds of people, but they did remember that we were the cookie guys.
Yes. And at that point, after they beat Oklahoma State, they come back, and Oaks is coming off of injury, but at this point he's pretty much been benched.
He has,
and it's Pezzavento's team. You got your senior quarterback, and you're just gonna roll with him. He's the hot hand. I don't remember if he wasn't turning the ball over or not, but he was steady, and the offense was good enough, and they were just running the ball down people's throats. And they had Graham, they had McCoy, and a couple of other weapons. But Pesavento is the starter, and the next 2 weeks after that Oklahoma State game, they run through Missouri and Iowa State, and it sets up the Nebraska game. And CU is 8-2, or Nebraska's 8-2. No, hold on. CU's 8-2.
Right.
Let me get that right, because Nebraska is undefeated.
Yeah, they're unbeaten.
And Nebraska is ranked second in the country, only behind Miami, who at this point, I think the year before they had gone 11-1 and got left out. Or no, they went 11-1 and got left out, and so they're on an absolute roll that season. And Nebraska had just consistently been Nebraska for the last 10 years, but this was the first time I think in a couple years where they were making another push at playing in the national championship game.
Yeah, and that was the BCS time period there. So there was all the voting, and it was the top two teams. And so now it's all setting up. So you've got September 11th, and the country is still acknowledging and honoring that. You've got this firefighters are coming out to this ball game, and now this is shaping up to be, we haven't beaten these guys in 10 years, and we have gone through some of the toughest, most heartbreaking losses to your rival. It's one thing to just get beat down, but when you squib kick, you miss a last second field goal, you miss a field goal at home that was a chip shot after coming back in the fourth quarter. So all of this is now coming together, and now this guy, Paul Keogh, and I are going to meet at the Dow Ward Center, and we're going to go to the game. And again, like we said earlier, I don't tell anybody at the tailgate party, but we know it's Nebraska. So we're already making plans to get out there early. I don't even remember what time the game started.
I think it was a noon start.
Was it?
It was either a noon or a 1.
It probably was a 1, but it was overcast.
It was just gray. That's just all gray. I remember.
And we barely had lights. Think about that. Yeah. This is how we're going back, that we barely had lights, but we're getting there. I don't think we got there at 5 o'clock in the morning, but I think it might have been around 6 or 6:30 in the morning. It was still dark, and we were cooking breakfast and drinking Bloody Marys, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this has the potential to just be the best tailgate party.
And you haven't told anybody, like
I haven't said anything. The only person I said something to was Holly. Hey, there's a good chance that I'm going to have firefighters here. Make sure nobody leaves the tailgate party, because I don't know when it's going to happen, but I think it's going to happen.
Well, and it was the day after Thanksgiving too, so we had a bunch of family in. I just was looking through all the photos this week, and I remembered everybody from the tailgate party being there, and different people that we would always be around. But we had family. There was so many people there. What do you remember from that week, if anything, of trying to coordinate, getting in touch with Paul, and what was the worry level that this isn't going to happen? Well, or was there any?
Yeah, there was some worry, but I think that again, in thinking about the context of wanting people to feel good, and wanting the firefighters to experience something that was good, that was away from their job, that was probably it was more important than the game, obviously, because life is more important than the game. But I've got that in the background, and then I've got this tailgate party, and then there's the game, and then I've got all this family, and Holly's birthday is on the 23rd. The game is on her birthday, so it's just all coming together to be this just magical day. And all I can think of is just don't screw it up. Don't screw it up. Don't miss the guy's phone call, and figure out how are you going to get this group of firefighters and Paul from the Dow Ward Center down to the tailgate party, which, as you know, is about a 10-minute walk if everything's clear.
Yeah. And it wasn't clear that day.
Oh, it wasn't clear.
It was not clear. And that's I do remember that was also the first time you guys ever let me go to a CU Nebraska game. Because it was just the tailgate was always a riot, but it was always out of control when it was the Nebraska game, and I vividly remember just how crazy that it was and how different it was from any other sort of tailgate we had. So just getting right into it.
Sure.
How did you navigate getting them from Dow Ward? What's the story, and how did the university not just come down on your ass? Quite honestly.
Yeah, and just interrupt me as I go, because I'll tell you the truth of what happened, because this is truthfully what happened. So Paul and I made the connection. We're gonna meet. It's like an hour and a half before kickoff, and the van pulls up, and my heart just starts to race, because all of the firefighters have their jackets on. Now, you can buy a New York firefighter jacket now and a hat, but when you had one then, you were fucking...
You could tell that they were FDNY.
They were real.
You could tell that they were FDNY, and they all were very... You could just look at their faces and see that they were New Yorkers.
Yeah, and I don't know the exact numbers of how many guys in their ladder died in 9/11, but there were guys that passed away. So I see them, and you just and so my first reaction is awe. Like I'm like, I don't know if I can pull this off, because all I want to do is hug these guys, and just say, hey, I love you, thank you for what you did, thank you for your bravery, and they've heard all this. Like Paul told me later, they hear all this. What we loved about being with you guys was you guys just treated us like people. And we'll get to that in a minute. So they get out of the van, and I'm like, okay, I got to go into Thomas mode and boss mode. So Paul gets out, and he goes, hey, give me that hat, because I had a CU hat, or one of the guys goes, give me that hat. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Take it. Give me your hat. So he gives me his hat. So now I kind of felt a little bit like I'm not worthy. I'm wearing an FDNY hat. I'm just this schmo. But I'm like, I'm probably going to need this to do the evilry that I'm about to do. So we get out of the car, and this was the first time that had met some administration from CU, and the person comes out and says, okay, we've got X number of tickets. And I don't remember, it was either 12 or 15 or whatever. I don't remember the exact number. And so they did all the counting, and I see, well, they're too short. So I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm going to be able to get in, because you got to get in to the Dow Ward or none of this shit happens.
And they were supposed to be on the field too, or they were on the field for the game.
Right. So they write everybody's name down, and they look at Paul, and they're like, and the lady says, well, who are you? I said, I'm Thomas Stenning. I'm BCTC, Boulder Creek Tailgate Club president. We're hosting the firefighters. And so the lady looks at me like, that doesn't mean shit to me. But Paul says he's with us. Gold. It's gold.
What are you going to say at that point?
So I get in. Once I get in, then my name goes on the list, Thomas Denning, BCTC. And then I see that they have these purple, which I still have one, purple field passes. And so they give those out, and I grab one because I'm like, I got to stick with these guys. So I get my field pass. I've got my ticket. So the lady then says, Elizabeth Hoffman, who happened to be the dean at the time, is sending her representatives over in about 20 minutes to go to the alumni breakfast. So if you guys just want to wait here, she'll come pick you up. And I'm like, these guys are not going to wait here. I'm not saying anything. And I said, hey, I've been in here before. So I'm like, why don't I give you guys a quick tour of the Dow Ward Center? So the lady goes away. The moment she goes away, I tell Paul, I go, let's go. We're going down to the tailgate party. And and the dudes, all the firefighters are like, yeah, that's fine. And Paul's like, okay, show us the way. And I go, well, we got like 12 or 15 firefighters. We got Paul, we got me, and they're all wearing their coats. And we walk out of the Dow Ward Center, and we literally get maybe 10 or 15 yards outside the Dow Ward Center, and people start to recognize them. People start to recognize them, and people are coming up to them and crying and hugging them and talking to them. And I'm like, I don't want to ruin this for people, because that's how I felt.
Yeah.
I'm like, but I said, we got to keep going, everybody. We got to keep going.
And again, for people who weren't around at the time, and I'm not the biggest rah, American guy, but it didn't really matter who you were in those post 2-3 months afterwards. It was different. It was just different.
It's such a good point, Colton, because everybody was on the same team, and everybody that we ran into on the way down to the tailgate party recognized who these guys were, and walked with them. And like I said, they're hugging them, they're crying, they're kissing them, and the firefighters like, oh, this is great. Where are we going? I go, we're going to have a couple drinks. You ever had an elk burger? Because you're about to have a elk burger. And so we go underneath the bridge and we get to the tailgate party, and I'm used to being loud and making noise. And so I scream out, I call Holly and I say, hey, we're going to be there in like 5 minutes. Make sure everybody's there. Have them ready to go, and have them by the center, where we had our little meeting area. And so everybody's there. So I walk in and I go, everybody, I want to present to you the New York City firefighters. And it was just, I can't say that it was pandemonium, because there was this reverence and awe and appreciativeness. And then there was just this emotion of, wow, we've got this game, and now look at this. And it just went off the rails at that point.
Yeah, what do you remember from the tailgate?
I remember seeing multiple firefighters smoking cigars, drinking shots of whatever, eating food, talking to people, and just living it up.
And I'll have photos on the site from the tailgate for the post that goes along with this. I don't know if we had the shot ski at that point.
I don't think we did have the shot ski.
Because I was going to say, if we did, they would have been on the shot ski.
They would have, 100% they would have been on it. But believe me, they were setting themselves free.
It was a party. It turned into a party.
I, at that point, thought, we may not make the game at this point. And I was worried because of the altitude, because of the trip, and what had they done the night before, and who had they been with, wherever they were staying. And so I thought, okay, we still have a game. We've got this just unbelievable game that we're going to go see. But I had one of the guys, Brian Thomas, introduced him. He was the kind of the leader of the firefighters, and he said a few words. We sang the fight song. We took some pictures, which I just treasure. And then we packed our stuff up and we headed up to the game.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess it would be different nowadays. Because, again, that was one of those things where back then you could 100% get away with that. Nowadays, somebody, you take them to a tailgate party, they're blowing up, the university's blowing up their phones. They're like, you don't even get them out because there's multiple wranglers there for them. There's no way they'd say, yeah, we can you can tour the Dow Ward anyway. We'll let this guy lead the tour, and then he can just take him away to do whatever he wants.
I don't even know that I make it into the Dow Ward Center. Probably I do because I got Paul telling me I'm with the group. But to your point, there's no way at that point that my season tickets are not revoked. That
it would have been a disaster.
A total disaster. But the guys, Paul and I started to worry that the guys wouldn't go up to the game.
Because that's how much of a shit show it was. But in a good way, nobody was crazy, but it was out of control in the best possible way.
And I'll tell you this. There are many, many things that are memorable from the tailgate party. One of them was one of the firefighters coming up to me and saying, you guys are the first people that treated us like people. Yeah, you hugged us. You cried. We just were doing our job. And you guys are treating us like people. He said, I can't tell you how many times we've been to dinners and events where they paraded us in front of people and shown us as New York firefighters, and you guys just treated us like we're the guys. And he just gave me a big hug.
And they probably were just sick of having to relive it through other people's eyes. And I'm sure that, there were people at the tailgate who were, I remember whatever. But it really was just have a beer. And there was, I keep harping on it, but it's so important to remember that it wasn't just, the energy without them being there would have almost been like this anyway. But it took everything to just the upper stratospheres because it already was so huge. And we've talked about what this game meant. And I think the history speaks for itself after what happened and how, both of these programs, Nebraska's had their moments since, and CU went to the Pac-12 title in 2016, and now with Deion has become such a focal point and talking point in college football. But the 23 years since, both programs have mostly been down since. And I've seen national college football writers, I think there was a piece in The Athletic about, hey, this is one of the most important games of the last 20 years. So I think the history would showcase just how historic it was and how important it was. And then for us personally, you added this moment, and again in the post I'll show, there's video of Jack Arute on ABC talking with the firefighters. They don't show it on the broadcast, but I remember there being pictures of them. I think at halftime, they were out at midfield with the American flag. So it wasn't just like, oh, well, you guys brought them in and then they were supposed to do, a little breakfast. It was a big deal that they were there, and, they were out at halftime in midfield. It was everybody knew about it.
Everybody knew about it, and at some point, a bunch of somebodies were saying, where the fuck are these guys?
And they were nowhere to be found.
They were nowhere to be found. And Colton, to your point, you've got just this unbelievable intensity of emotion. It's the day, it's Thanksgiving. It's Holly's birthday. It's the biggest game on the college football schedule.
For the Big 12 North title.
For the title. And you've got these... And I don't want to diminish them by calling them celebrities, but
they were.
They were the biggest thing around. And you have them, and if one of the guys is saying, you guys treated us like people, and they're giving us hugs and saying we were just doing our jobs, and we're still just treating them like one of us, that permeates. That permeates. And so we start to walk up to the field, and I'm like, are you fucking serious? I'm on the field for this shit.
And it was the emotion and the atmosphere was so charged. And that's one of the main things I remember from that day was, to this day, it's still, and I've been to national championships, I've been to playoff games in the NFL. That is the loudest crowd I've ever been in. It was like a jet engine for the whole day, and just the emotion of it and everything leading up to it. And we've kind of talked about it. Nebraska was on a 9-game win streak. CU hadn't won in 10 years since 1990. They tied in 91, 1919. And the previous 6 games were just excruciating losses. They lost 17-12 in 1996. That was the game where if CU would have won, they could have played for the national championship. So that was a huge loss. They lost 27-24 in 1997. That was Nebraska's 3rd national championship in 4 years. That's how close. And a lot of people would put that if you're your age or even my age and you remember that 97 Nebraska team, a lot of people would say that's one of the greatest teams of all time, and CU played them so close. The next year they lost 16-14. 1999, we watched through the end of that the other day. They lost 33-30 in overtime, a game that, again, if you've never seen Colorado-Nebraska 1999, YouTube it. It's maybe the most unbelievable last 5 minutes of any game I've ever seen. CU's down 27-6 to start the fourth quarter. It's 27-13 with 4 minutes left. They score. They get an onside kick. They score with under 3 minutes left. They punt to CU with under 2 minutes left. CU on like the second play inside their own 5. They get 10 yards, but they fumble. Nebraska has the ball inside the 20. First play, Crouch runs the option. The pitch goes right off the running back's face mask. CU gets the ball. They get inside the 20. They have a 34-yard field goal in the middle of the field with 1 second left. and it was Jeremy Aldrich at the time, right?
Yeah.
He boots it wide, just right in the middle of the field, and then they lose in overtime.
It looked like an extra point.
It was just right in the middle of the field, and they lose in overtime. And it gets even worse in 2000, which is the game we talked about where you went to. They get the lead on 2-point conversion, squib kick, and they lose. So all of these are so excruciating. The losing streak continues, and it's to your most hated rival. And in addition to all that pain, and you mentioned this to me a couple days ago when we were talking about this, and this is something, because I've watched the 2001 game, the actual broadcast front to back like 3 or 4 times. They show this graphic on the start of the 2001 broadcast that Nebraska had scored on literally the first play of the game in 4 of the last 6 games. You said there was an interception return.
Yeah.
I think Carell Buckhalter had like back-to-back games where he had an 80-yard touchdown. So there were these painful losses, and there was shit like that where Nebraska was scoring on the first play of the game. And so you led into the 2001 game where that was a storyline where they're running onto the field, and Jack Arute is running with Nebraska and Frank Solich out onto the field, and they stop at the 50, and he asks him, Frank, what's the first play of the game going to be? Do you think you can score?
Yeah, and he's like, we called him slow pitch. He was such a nice guy, and he's like, we're going to get a little misdirection and blah, see what we can do. But you're leaving out one other thing. So when you think about rivalries, there's always things that piss you off about the other team. And on senior day, it was either the year before or 2 years before that when the game was at home, Nebraska ran on the field when Colorado was introducing their seniors. That's just fucked up. So this year, so Barnett's like, okay, we know we're ready for your shit. CU puts their security out, which is again makes it amazing that I was able to get into the Dow Ward and swipe these guys. But they put up the fence in front so Nebraska can't get on the field. And Nebraska's always, and rightfully so, talks about how they travel well, and they come out to Boulder because what else are you going to do?
Yeah, they had in 2018, they had their senator tweet out how many people they had at the game when they were leading, and then they lost the game.
Yeah.
It was just a great Twitter moment.
Makes it great. So it's building. We've had this marvelous tailgate party. There's all this history. Nebraska scores on the first play, in these games, and CU kicks off. And it's the first time that I've been on the field since the 1991 Orange Bowl that CU beat Notre Dame, and I'd kind of forgotten how all that noise just cascades down. And if you're fortunate enough to be in Folsom Field, and I know it's not the only stadium like this, you are right against the players. And there's not much area between,
especially then.
Yeah, the out of bounds line and where you're standing, and so CU kicks off, first play. It's Sean Tufts, I think.
Crouch runs the option. They run the option to the left, and Tufts, who was a great linebacker for CU, just fucking blows it
Boom! Up. Blows up, and the stadium just goes wild. And it's so loud. It's one of those things, like you said, Colton, where it's so loud, you literally are yelling in the person's ear next to you, and they can't hear you.
Yep.
They can't hear you.
And CU gets the ball. And on the first drive, Bobby Purify, running back, scores about a 40-yard touchdown. And it's so open, and he's so confused at how big this gap is through the Nebraska defense that if you go back and watch, at about the 5-yard line, he slows up, and he starts looking around for a penalty flag. And he gets drilled as he goes into the end zone. And Gary Danielson's like, I think he thought there was a flag on the play, and of course he scores on a 70-yarder later, which gets called back from a bullshit holding penalty.
Ugly.
But that's how the game starts, and it just, in the first quarter, it completely cascades. Nebraska fumbles. Daniel Graham scores about a 20-yard touchdown on CU's second play. They get up 28-3 in the first quarter, and it was, I say this, and it's true, and I'm not going to keep it PG, but even as an 11-year-old, I knew that this was something that you only get these events every once in a while as a sports fan. And it was orgasmic. It really was for the whole crowd because all of this lead up, and CU just fucking blew the doors off of them in the first quarter.
They did, and to your point, Colton, the crowd, you think, just when you think that it's not going to get louder, it does. Because there's so much frustration. there's so much emotion, there's so much hatred, there's so much tension that it just continues to build. And from the Nebraska side, they're like, what's happening? What is make it stop?
Because
like,
it's national championships on the line for them.
Yeah. And so CU's got this, it's like 28-3 lead. And I remember, like, after the first 2 touchdowns, I'm like, this is a great start. But I've been through all the shit. So I'm not, they could be up 60-3, and then I might be, okay, I'm good. So it's 14-3, then it's 21-28. And I remember taking my hat off, my FDNY hat off, and my wife Holly was sitting in our seats. We're in row 18, section 121, and I motion. She comes down. I give her the hat, and I'm like, this is the greatest day of my life. Happy birthday. So she's wearing the hat, and she's got her black and gold jacket on, and she goes back up into the seats. And it's still the first quarter.
Do you remember anything on the sideline with the firefighters other than the main thing that we'll get to?
Yeah.
That kind of puts the cherry on top. Do you just remember their reactions and kind of what that was like?
Yeah, I do. So there were 2 things that stuck out, and we'll get to the third thing in a minute. The first was that once CU was up 28-3 or whatever it was, they were up by 3 or 4 touchdowns. They just didn't think it could get any louder. And we're watching the game, and at that point, you know, the buzz is wearing off a little bit. Now they're standing, and it is a little cool, but not cold. But they're just taking it in because it's so loud. And Paul Keogh, who was the host, and me, we know what's going on. This is going to be an ass kicking for the ages. Yeah. This day is never going to happen again, and it never has, and it never will.
We've talked about it, and I kind of mentioned it earlier or just a second ago. That as a sports fan, and I'm sure whether you root for CU or any other college football team or any other sports team, you know, unless you're an Alabama fan or just a team that constantly wins, and even as an Ohio State fan, I can only think of a few games where I felt like this in moments where it was just one of those days where it was like when the Avs beat the Lightning in Game 2 the other year, where they beat them 7-0, and it was just like, this is never going to happen again. We could win 4 more cups, and there might not be a game like this. And it was just one of those days, and if you were there, you'll know, and even if you weren't, it wasn't just Nebraska getting their ass kicked, because it was on a Friday. And so it was the featured, that it was always on a Friday. It was the featured game at that time slot every single year. It wasn't just like, turn it on to ESPN2, Nebraska's getting their ass beat. It was on ABC, national. They were sending to halftime in New York, where I think it was John Saunders, Terry Bowden were the guys, and they were specifically only talking about the CU game. So Nebraska is getting murdered in front of the whole nation.
Right.
And it's not just, it wasn't just happening in a vacuum.
Right.
This is for everybody to see.
And Colorado fans know that. So the firefighters, when we, before we left the Dow Ward Center, remember, this is pre-facility, pre-Clemson $80 million facility or whatever. The Dow Ward was state of the art at the time. And if you've never been to Folsom Field before, it's truly a beautiful stadium. And they're looking at it going, wow, this is really beautiful. This is really beautiful. So CU gets up, and it's the end of the first quarter, and there's all this noise. And a couple of the firefighters look at me and they say, is it like this every home game? And I look at them and I said, guys, this will never happen again. This will never happen again. What you're experiencing is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And you're a part of it.
And we've both seen, there's been some great moments. I think the next year was, what stands out, Jeremy Bloom and the, whatever it was, 95-yard touchdown against Kansas State when they were both ranked. I went to every game the year that they won the Pac-12 South in 2016, and I think they went undefeated at home. And that completely was out of the blue. And that's one of the greatest stretches of my life as a fan. But it wasn't on the same level. When they beat Nebraska in 2018, when they came back. And I guess the only thing that's been close was just this past year. But that was just for a different there was just so much hype with Dion.
Yeah.
But in terms of just sheer euphoria, I guess maybe this year was probably, the lead-ups to those games are probably the only thing that comes
Yeah,
close.
I think you're
the
right.
CSU game, the Nebraska game, the USC game, and the TCU
But this
game
was
being on the
like
road.
you said, you got the added dimension of it's the signature game of the weekend, and you have the firefighters there. We haven't beaten them in 10 years. And so they get called out, the firefighters do, to do the flag thing. And Paul's like, and I'm like, no, I don't.
It was a bridge too far.
Yeah. In Tombstone, my hypocrisy only goes so far. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't do that. I'm not part of that. And people are like, my friends are looking at me standing with the firefighters, and they're watching the game. And I'm not sure that they wouldn't say, well, I'd rather just stand with them.
Yeah.
And watch the game. It was that emotional and that cool. And they're like, I want your hat. Give me a hat. And I'm like, I'm not going to start, pimping these guys for their hats. They just want to,
just want to enjoy the game.
Just let them enjoy the game.
And you physically stood out too, because everybody else is wearing the FDNY jackets, and you have our favorite, and it's still in the basement, the black, white, and yellow starter jacket. And if you're from that era, you'll know what I'm talking about, and I can take a picture of it. But you've got that on, and so and you've got the gold spray painted shoes on, which we'll talk about here. But after that first quarter, things kind of go back and forth, and CU is just running the ball at will. They get another 70-yard touchdown called back, which we talked about with Bobby Purify. But then Chris Brown starts to get on a roll. But we get to the fourth quarter, and it's 42-30. Nebraska makes a little bit of a push. CU stops them on the goal line, which is probably the play of the game, when I think Darren Diedrich tries to jump over the pile at the goal line and gets hit and fumbles the ball, and that kind of helps CU kind of stave off the rally. But it's 42-30 heading into the fourth. And I remember, and I don't know if you felt the same, even being young, when Nebraska made that push, because they never really stopped them. I never thought, oh, they're going to come back and win. Yeah. It just felt like, no, this one is our day. It doesn't matter. And in the fourth quarter, CU, about as bad as they beat them in the first quarter, just ground and pounds and just runs it right down their throat.
Well, and they do, and when so we were on about the 10-yard line when Diedrich fumbled. And you're looking, and at this point, the game is it's getting darker. The crowd hasn't let up in the slightest. The Nebraska fans are now trying to figure out, do we even have enough possessions left? Not even thinking about the time. Are there enough possessions left in the game to come back? And from a CU perspective, you were concerned. I was a little concerned, but I'm like, there's no way. But you're waiting for it to, and so it just continues to build, because there was a little bit of a lull from the CU side, but now it's just starting to build. He fumbles, and CU just starts to take control of the game.
Yeah, Brown, of course, scores 6 touchdowns, finishes with 198 yards. Purify runs for 154. Should have been about 230 with that penalty involved. And also, too, as a side note, if you go back and watch the broadcast, because, again, this is happening on a Friday, so everything else is about to happen, and I think Oklahoma is ranked third or fourth in the country at that point, and they're about to play Oklahoma State, and they have Bob Stoops on the phone, and he's like, I can't believe what I'm seeing from this, because he's thinking if they win, we're supposed to play Nebraska, and he's watching CU's run game just dominate them, and at a certain point in the fourth quarter, Brent Musburger's like, this isn't a fluke. Oklahoma's going to have to be ready for these guys next week, and of course, Oklahoma shits the bed. Rashawn Woods' last-minute touchdown against OU. That knocks them out of the national championship race, and Texas ends up winning the Big 12 South. But as all this is happening, we get to the fourth quarter, and we have to talk about my favorite moment, probably of all time, where Nebraska throws an interception on their own side of the field, inside their own 20. Safety Michael Lewis, who we talked about earlier, picks it off. He cuts down the right side of the field, and he gets stopped, I think, at around the 5-yard line. He runs out of bounds directly to where you guys are. It's your story to tell, and I'll have video of this so you guys know that this is a true fucking story. This really happened. Tell the story.
True. Okay, so, and I can only just tell the truth without adding any additional detail. Out of everything that's already happened, how in the fuck do you get a hold of Paul? Why does he call you back? Are you able to meet him? Yes. Can you get into the Dow Ward? Yes. Do you get a field pass? Yes. Do they go down to the tailgate party? Yes. Wonderful time. Tears. Unbelievable. And then we get to the game, and the game just goes through the roof. So you mentioned the comeback. Chris Brown scores, and CU goes up by like 2 scores, maybe 3 at that point. But it was still, they're going to get the ball twice more. Nebraska's probably going to score again, but we're going to win the game. So Nebraska throws a pass. Michael Lewis picks it off. I'm like, and I'm just going bananas now because I know that's it. That's the game. CU's going to win the game. And he starts to cut. I'm like, he's going to fucking score. He's going to score right in front of us. And so he picks it off. He kind of meanders his way, and he runs down the sideline. He gets tackled or knocked out of bounds, and he literally puts the football down at my feet. At my feet. And he's, and so I don't know whether to like join everyone's jumping up and touching the players, and I'm like, I should do that. I'm like, no, I shouldn't. I'm going to take that football. And I looked down, and I'm like, crap, am I going to get arrested? And I'm like, I haven't gotten arrested yet. So I take the football and pick it up, and I still remember it had the chalk on it, because they had
one of those cool Nike footballs.
Yeah, it was a Nike football, and they had chalked the out of bounds lines. And I'm like, I've got this big ass starter jacket on, and there's all these people on the sideline. So I take that son of a bitch and I just put it right in, right underneath, and hold it. And there's so many people on the sideline that, I don't see any referees or anybody coming up to ask me for the football. And I'm like, I'm keeping this football. And so CU scores a touchdown. They win the game. And I've got this football, and I look at it, and I look at Paul, and I look at the firefighters, and I said, Paul, I'm giving you the game ball.
Got a goddamn game ball. After everything we just talked about in the lead up and all this shit, he gets a game ball.
He gets a game ball, and I'm like, I can't keep this in good conscience. I mean, I want to, and I'm like, Paul, I want to give this to you, and he's like, I don't need it. He goes, they gave me 2 balls, and I'm gonna get them signed, and I'll bring. I said, I want you to have it as a thank you, because this has been one of the greatest days of my life. I don't care what you do with it. Give it to the firefighters. You do whatever. And I also want to give you. So we ended up all signing our flag.
Yeah.
And I said, I would be honored. We gave him the flag. And I said, I'd be honored if you would take the flag as well, which he did. He took the ball. He took the
flag. CU flag, right?
Yeah, it's a CU flag. Gold CU flag with the black buffalo. He took both of those things. And then this is what just humbles me. Brian Thomas and a couple of the firefighters came up and said, you guys are the first people to just treat us like people. This has been wonderful. We want you to come out to our Christmas party this year. We're inviting you to come out to our firefighter, to our Christmas party for the ladder. And I said, well, I'm going to be in New York. If you change your mind, I don't feel like I should come, but if you want me to, I will. And I did.
How was it?
It was unbelievable. It was incredible. They had the football. They had the flag. They hung the flag. And there were other people with CU then. At that point, the athletic director and all these other, I call them hangers-on, that run the program. They're like latching on to all this. I'm like, you can latch on all you want. We got the best of what happened that day. We got the best. And they had the flag hanging up there. They had the ball. And I told you this the other day. They had 2 pictures that I saw. They had one that was 9/11, was black and white, and the one next to it was black and white, and it said Ash Wednesday.
And we ended up, I think in 2003 or 4, right before I started high school, we went to New York. And I think we stopped by the ladder.
We did. We stopped by the ladder, and it's life is rich with experiences, and reflecting back on that day, Paul actually called the office and got me a football, which I have at my desk here, which was signed by the 2001 team, which will be yours someday. And, I kept that. He said, hey, I want you to have that. And then Kathy, who was Coach Barnett's secretary a few years later when they did the expansion at Folsom Field, they were putting on the top girder. And I had called her. They were going off to one game. She goes, oh, well, yeah, the guys are all signing this girder. She goes, as a matter of fact, if you want to sign it, you can. So I did. Thomas Denning and BCTC 2001, Go Buffs forever. And that's at the stadium.
That's awesome. Well, and we have just for what that day is, I mean, in the room we're sitting in your office, we have the football. There's the field pass somewhere, which I got to get a picture of so I can put it on the post. And then there's 2 signed photographs from Chris Brown running into the end zone with no Nebraska player even close by him, and then another smaller one of Bobby Purify on his first touchdown run with a Nebraska player diving at him. Yeah. And then finally, I think is that from like the week after?
Yeah.
It's a picture of you standing on the field in an empty stadium hugging Chris Brown with the biggest shit-eating grin on your face.
When I got him to sign the pictures, and I remember, I mean, they hear this all the time, they're athletes, but I said, what you did here will long outlive anything.
It's still the most legendary
ever happened.
until, but at least on field. And, I think that, we're both pretty bullish about kind of what the Deion Sanders era is going to look like and how much fun this past year was.
Yeah.
And the excitement of, seeing those guys and watching Travis Hunter. That's really the last time other than 2016 where we really had those moments with those group. And that day was just outside of everything else that was around it. The game itself has lived on through history. And then this story that we lived just was a whole extra layer to it.
It really was. And I would say that, as I reflect on it, that there were years where I would tell the story and I couldn't get through it without crying because of the emotions of so many emotions from September 11th and what the country went through, but particularly what the firefighters went through.
Yeah.
And just in my own small way of seeing, where the towers had fallen, a month or two after, and just seeing how gruesome that was, and knowing that in some small way for a short period of time we were able to share probably the most magical moment in CU sports history for the football team was special.
Do you have any stories from the post game tailgate? Because I remember we stayed out there until pretty much was legally allowed until about 11 or midnight, because we tailgated next to an apartment complex, which I don't know if I think it's still there.
Yeah,
but they don't let tailgating there anymore. You can't tailgate.
You can, and I really don't, because there was so much. I remember going on the field, and I remember saying goodbye to the firefighters, and then the fans had rushed the field, and I remember grabbing some grass, and I remember thinking, I should probably just sell the season tickets because it's never going to get better than this. This will never happen again. It's, that confluence of all that happened. And I remember going back down to the tailgate party, and we had a fire going. And I think we were all emotionally exhausted because it was such a stupendous experience. It was so special. And I remember getting home, and I don't even remember what time we'd gotten home, but, we had company. I mean, it's Thanksgiving weekend.
The whole I think we hosted the day before.
Yeah. And so you have all these things. And I just remember thinking, I think this is one of the greatest days of my life, if not the greatest day of my life. It was just,
it really was
that special.
One, to add to it, they win 62-36. They win the Big 12 North. Oklahoma loses the next day. So Texas is in the Big 12 championship, and Texas is ranked third in that Big 12 championship, and CU upsets them the next week, and that was, I think, the final Big 12 championship at Texas Stadium on the old turf. Cedric Benson gets a concussion on an interception return in that game, and CU again runs the ball. Chris Brown has another big game and wins the Big 12 pretty much out of nowhere.
Yeah, they do, and Holly went to the Big 12 championship game. I just didn't have it in me to go. It was like I've already seen everything I need to see, and for whatever reason, I ended up, they didn't make the national championship against Miami. Nebraska did, and Nebraska got slaughtered. But I was so disappointed that they didn't get a chance to play for the national championship that year that I probably shouldn't have gone to the Fiesta Bowl. They played
Oregon,
and
they just
because
Oregon had a case too.
Yeah,
and Oregon made it clear that they thought they should have been in the national championship,
and they took it out,
and they were
CU.
really good. And of course, Nebraska gets in; they get slaughtered, like you said. But something we didn't mention: Eric Crouch wins the Heisman, Nebraska's quarterback. So Nebraska, I still like the BCS. I've been a big 14 playoff guy. I don't like the expanded playoff, but for people who look back on the BCS with rose tinted glasses and don't remember, like that was really, there were controversies the first 3 or 4 years of the BCS, but that was the first one that was a big deal because Nebraska got hammered in that game, and there was no, they turned the ball over a few times, and it was there was no room for doubt that they had gotten their ass beat in that game, and CU had won the Big 12, and then CU beat Texas, who they had lost to earlier, so people had made the case that, like, okay, they have 2 losses, but they played the team that they lost to, and then they beat them. And I don't remember. I think Oregon probably lost to, I don't know if it was USC but they had 1 loss. And of course, Nebraska gets in after getting their ass kicked and then being off, and Crouch wins the Heisman. And if you ever want to see just a moment in time of where college football was, I think Crouch threw like 8 touchdowns that year and had 10 interceptions. He threw for like almost barely over 1,000 yards, and he had like 1,200 or 1,300 yards rushing. But it was just it's a moment in time in college football that you will never see again.
You won't, and to your point, think about this: Nebraska loses their last 2 games, they give up 62 and 43 points, and it was just an era that now they're with the expanded playoffs, you just wonder how many games will you get like that, where you have a CU Nebraska, or you have 2 rivals that are number, in the top 3 and are not, because we see it so much now. You see Georgia play Alabama, and not to diminish, I'm sure that Ohio State, Michigan, that those games are important, but this was the game at this time, and it was the game for America because it was on Black Friday.
Is there, or have you kept up at all with any of the firefighters, or is that just it's been so long now?
It's been so long now. Kind of
got lost to time.
Yeah, I did go back to New York many years ago, and I saw Brian, and we were mid conversation, and they got a call, which was so appropriate.
That's pretty fitting.
It's so appropriate, and I haven't been back to New York since. Well, I have, and I've gone by but it just felt like it was gone. If that makes. It was just gone. It was like a moment that probably shouldn't have happened, but for some reason it did.
And it was spectacular.
Yeah, it was.
And I hope that this podcast blows up enough to where one of those guys hears it and can kind of relive that day again, because we keep saying it, and I hope that people who weren't there, because it is such a special moment for a lot of CU fans. I know people whose lock screen on their phones is still 6236, because it meant so much to all of us. You can probably relate in your life and in your sports fandom to a day like that, and a story that just kind of everything went your way. And with this one, of course, there's so much that added on to it that made it a day that really was, even as an 11-year-old, for me, still one of the greatest days of my life.
And I'll give you the last word. I would just say that again, it was a totally different time period for the country.
Yeah.
And it's not, Thomas wants things to be like they used to be. That's just the way it was. Everybody was on one team, and when you paraded this group of firefighters out, there was this respect, reverence, appreciation, sadness, and recognition of what they had done. And it was just incredible to be that. And you see, reunions where you have veterans that come back and they surprise their families. Those are wonderful. This was on a scale where everybody felt like those are our brothers and sisters that are out there, and in some way we want to show them our appreciation. And when you layered that in with a game, it was just totally magical.
And kind of adding on to the demarcation of just time, and not even, this doesn't even have anything to do with 9/11. Just something, and even we kind of talked about this last night. Now there's just so much going on that even when you do have special moments, something happens and then something else happens. And you can say like, oh, that was great, but another moment happens, and that goes along with every other sport too. It's just, a constant feed, and we can watch everything, and there's access on every Saturday to literally, I can watch any game if I want to. You can go online with streaming, you can do whatever. But back then, there were a set amount of games. You could do the ESPN pay-per-view plan if you wanted to watch, a certain game that maybe wasn't on local TV. But at that point, especially on Friday, that was the game you all had to watch, and you had to have your whole focus on it because there wasn't Twitter, there wasn't Instagram. If you wanted to dedicate your time to doing something, you were going to do that. And so it was literally all eyes on that. And so that's it's a broader discussion of just, the difference between now and then. That's more why I think those moments stand out, because you had to give your full attention. And then there was the postscript to it, which would become a thing. Like, I don't know how many people are still, after a big win, watching Sports Center. But back then, that was what you did.
You watched it to get
6 hours of the content, and you would rewatch it again.
Yeah, and you didn't have, because I recorded them on VHS tape. And so we watched them, and I think, you didn't mention this, or maybe you have on previous casts or in your articles, but when college football season's over for the year, for those of us that are fans, we miss it. And now, to your point, there's, okay, well, what's going on with NIL, what's going on with recruiting, what's going on with the transfer portal. But when you go back to this time, there was recruiting season and there was football season, and you had your full focus on the game. And I think I remember the last time you were here over the summer, we were between college football season, and you had said, hey, I'd like to do this podcast someday. And we watched the entirety of the 27-12 game that CU won in 1990 with all the commercials. We just watched it. You threw it up on YouTube.
Like it was a regular broadcast.
Like it was a regular broadcast. And we were both just like leaning into it, watching it. And it's a great point that you make, because you, in addition to watching the game, like I thought, oh, well, I want to go home and watch the VHS recording, but I also want to see Sports Center, and I got to get the newspaper because I got to see the pictures. And you mentioned the pictures that I have up. I ended up calling Cliff Grassmick, who's been a photographer for the Boulder Daily Camera for years and years and years, and saying, hey, I saw a couple of pictures in the paper I absolutely have to have. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm not going to reproduce them and sell them. I just want to put them up. And then I said, for good measure, the firefighters were at my tailgate party, just to, and he's like, dude, I'll get you the file. Just don't distribute them. And that's how I got the pictures.
That's incredible. Yeah. Is there any other things from that day or those memories that you want to hit on that you think we might have missed?
I don't think so. I think you did a great job of bringing it out, and you kind of took me back to, a place that was just wonderful to be at. It was just a wonderful experience, and very blessed to have been a part of it.
Yeah, well, this is a story that I've wanted out for 23 years now, and now, we have a medium to do it, so I can't wait for people to hear it, and hopefully they can relate to it and just get to enjoy how crazy it was. And I'll repeat, especially with the football thing, you will see video evidence of this shit. This all happened. This is all true. None of it is made up. None of it is fabricated. It is all a true story, and it is all spectacular.
Well, I guess now that you said that, the one
because you can see you dance. That's the thing I should say, and I'll post it on the clip. When Lewis picks the ball off and puts it in the end zone, the camera goes fast and then cuts up, and you were wearing the gold shoes, and you're dancing up and down, and it's just a legendary moment for us as a family.
Of course it is, and getting the football was spectacular as well. But you reminded me of, it would be similar today of having a pop star or some famous group of people, not just one, unless there's like one person, and I'm not going to mention the name of them, who's shown on TV constantly, and being able to take that person away from a slated function down to your party. You just can't do that. Yeah. It's just not possible to do that, but somehow it happened, and then it just built off of that. And to see the guys say, does this happen all the time? And I just remember saying, no, this will never happen again. Never. So, good stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad you came on. I'm glad you got to tell the story. We'll put it out here, I don't know, in the next couple of weeks, and we'll have some big treatment for it, and I hope people really like it. But any final words?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. We'll wrap it up there. I'll send it to an outro, and we'll catch you guys. Thanks for joining, Dad.
Thanks for having me, Colton. It was wonderful.
Man, what a moment, what a day, what a story. And it gets even better because there's something that my dad forgot, and it's probably the funniest thing that happened that day. So we recorded this. I went to Colorado over the holidays to visit them and spend some time with them, and that's when we recorded this episode. And I'm back in the Bay now, and when I got back to California, literally within like 30 minutes or an hour of me landing, I get a text from him, and he's like, shit, I forgot the funniest thing that happened that day. And if the last hour and a half weren't enough evidence for you to realize how much my dad fucking hates Nebraska, its fans, its program, everything about them, if that wasn't enough, this will put it over the top for you. Despite the fact that them and CU don't play anymore every single year, this will be the final bow on this story and what happened that day.
So one of the great things about a rivalry is just the hatred that the fans and the players have. And you did we talked earlier in the podcast about just the environment and all these close losses that CU had. And I hate that term because a loss is a loss, but that just inflicts this mental and emotional pain and gives the rivalry the richness that it has. So when I talk about hatred, I'm not talking about like physical hatred there, I want to go beat somebody up or whatever, but it's just like a hatred. I hate Nebraska's colors, their helmet, their team, their fans, the self-entitlement that they had all those years. And so as the game's going on and we're all starting to take in this just unbelievably cool environment and the amount of noise that's in the environment, and that CU just continues to build and they're hitting all these big plays, I start to look, I'm on the field and I'm taking all this in, and then I start to look in the stands, and that just fuels me to just go even crazier. And I'm looking behind me, and in the very first row there's like 5 Nebraska fans that are my age, and they're all dudes, and they're all wearing the stupid big red gear, and they're so proud that they support their team, and they're just getting their asses whooped. And so I'm watching their perplexity in this, and then looking at how the CU fans are interacting with them in the area. And I see a couple of CU fans that are like like cheering right in their face, and then they're kind of messing around with their hats and touching their hats and whatnot. And it's really starting to piss these guys off, which it would piss me off too, because I never advocate like touching another fan or even like cheering in their face. I just cheer at the game, not at the person. So things start to heat up a little bit, and I can see that they're not going in the direction of the Nebraska fans the way that they want them. So one of the guys goes, and I look back, and there's like 2 or 3 police officers, and there's some heated discourse back and forth, and they're trying to get the folks to settle down. And I turn around and say to the officer, and I did dirty on this, but it feels good just thinking about it. I look at the police officer and I say, officer, I've been watching these guys, and they're the Nebraska fans, obviously. And I said, and they are agitating the CU fans. They're turning around and telling them to stop cheering, and they're the ones that have instigated all of this. And the Nebraska dudes are just looking at me. And I'm like, at this point, I'm untouchable because I've got an FDNY hat on. That's where I'm saying that I kind of did the dirty, because I'm using my covert status to say this. And the next thing I see is the officer handcuffs 3 of the Nebraska dudes and leads them out of the stadium. I'm just like, Thomas, that is so wrong. But that's part of the emotion and part of the rivalry, and part of the memories from that day, is that sometimes, even with all the good, you got to throw a little dirty in there.
What a piece of work, man. Unbelievable. That's only my dad. Only him. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's show. It brought back a lot of memories for me about that day, and hopefully it did for you too. Whether you're a CU fan like us and you were at Folsom Field right there with us, and you were living that moment and what it was, or if you were just a general college football fan and you remember watching that game, or even if you weren't around for that game, you're just a sports fan in general, and it gave you a flashback to days that you've had like this. I think whether you're a Colorado fan or not, we can all relate to days in our lives, whether it's in regards to sports or something else that happened in your life, where it's just like everything felt like on whatever day, everything went perfect. And it was just one of those days where you knew in the moment, this is never going to happen again. I think we can all relate to that. And that was really kind of the point that I wanted to hammer home with this one. And as I wrap things up here, because I've been going for so long, this is the longest podcast I think I've ever done. I just want to thank you for listening to today's show, whether it's your first time listening or you've been here with me since I was recording on the Hangout in the Holy Land podcast back in like 2016, and all just the random sporadic episodes that I drop here. I really do appreciate the support, and I want to urge you to not only subscribe, but more importantly than even subscribing, check out the companion pieces that I'm going to have that go along with this one up on YouTube and on twostripescpd.com. So on YouTube, there's going to be pictures, screenshots from the game, and when I say pictures, I mean like family pictures that we all took during that day to just kind of to tell the story along with the audio aspect of it. So pictures from that day that we have, screenshots from the game, and just of other little stories that we talked about throughout, that season, certain players, their recruiting, just stuff like that that'll help really flesh out the story if you're more of a visual person. And so that'll be on YouTube. Subscribe, youtube.com/Colton Denning. It is the best place for college football content on YouTube, or on the internet for that matter. And then twostripescpd.com. And on that note, as a token of my gratitude to you for listening, I'm running an offer for $14 off a yearly Two Stripes CPD subscription. It's usually $50 per year, but if you go to twostripescpd.com/6236, you can get a sub for $36 for a full year, which includes full access to all the content on the site, everything that I drop, all of the archives on the site, and it's going to include some incredible stuff that I'm doing in March, where I've got a new piece of content dropping every single day. Nobody does the off season like I do the off season. I hold you down better than anybody else does, and I want you to check out the site because I got a bunch of really, really cool stuff. There's no better college football website. So I'll have a companion piece to this on the site with, again, pictures from that day that we have, video of my dad in the end zone from the Michael Lewis interception, so he's not bullshitting about the football story when he stole the ball, and more to just go along from that day. So make sure to subscribe there, twostripescpd.com/6236, and you can get a sub, $14 off for $36 for a full year and all of the best college football content on the internet. And make sure to subscribe to the show too. Two Stripes podcast on Apple, Spotify. Leave a rating and review. Tell all your friends about it. And interact with all my content. You follow me on Twitter @DubsCo. Help spread the show if you're a CU fan, or just enjoy the story and tell me what you think about it. That's pretty much it, man. Shout out to my pops one more time for joining the show and telling this story. I've wanted it out for literally over 20 years, and I'm so happy that it's finally out there and people can hear it. And I hope you all really, really enjoyed it, and that you have a wonderful week and whatever's going on in your life. And we get through this college football off season. We got about 170 something days to go. But again, I'm going to hold you down throughout the off season. So lock into the show here, lock into Two Stripes CPD, lock into youtube.com/Colton Denning. But it's time for me to get out of here. Thank you for listening to the show. My name is Colton Denning. This is the Two Stripes podcast, and I'll holler at you next time.